Having a good, functional and constant workflow to render your scenes after you have finished the modeling, texture, animation and the lighting setup is pretty necessary to every Blender user. And today we are going to learn how to make such workflow which we can always rely on. And during the tutorial, you will notice how the problems you keep facing during the render will be solved one by one. So this is a scene that I have been recently working on. I have finished the modeling part, texturing, animation and the lighting setup, and now it is time to render. So first of all, we start with the render panel. I want to render my scene in cycles, so I set the render engine on cycles. And obviously the device on GPU compute to use the GPU instead of CPU. Now that we are rendering, the sampling of the viewport doesn't matter anymore. But for the sampling of the render, I'm going to go for a kinda high value like 1000. Because I have a glass material in this scene and I want to get the best result out of it. And by the way, I tested so many different glass materials, but none of them worked the way I liked. And it took me a long time to make this glass material, which is absolutely insane. And now I am using this glass material in all of my scenes. And if you have a glass material in your scene, in the light pass, if you have a good PC, you can set the transparent property to a higher value like 16 or 32 or more. And be sure that you will get better results, but it increases the render time. And it is of course suggested to enable the motion blur in your scene to add another layer of realism. Then we go down to a really important part, the color management, where in the view transform we have a few options, 3 of which are mostly used: a standard, AGX and filmic. You can see how each of them affect the color tolerance of the scene. And of course, there is an exposure and gamma option by the help of which you can adjust them even more. One of the major features of this workflow is you can adjust this part at any time that you like, even after the render. So in my case, I guess filmic is the best option. Then head over to the output panel. The resolution is 1920 by 1080. And I'm going to render at 30 frames per second, which is a reasonable frame rate. And here comes the most important part, the output. So I make a folder somewhere in my PC. And I choose this folder that I made from here. And here set a name for your render. Now this scene will be rendered into this new folder that we made and we have chosen here. Leave the file extension and cache result to the default setting. Then for the file format, choose OpenEXR. If you render your scene as a video file like FFmpeg-4, at any point when your PC runs into a problem, you have to start rendering from all over again. OpenEXR is picture format like PNG or JPEG, but it is much better. It is a high dynamic range, multi-channel raster file format. In a nutshell, it saves the data layer by layer, which can be tweaked later. If your render stops or you stop it yourself, you can start rendering from where you have left, and that is pretty amazing. For the color, we don't usually need the alpha channel, so set it on RGB. For the color depths, the float full will give the best result. But we can do with the flow half, and we will still get a good result. And this float half will also decrease the render time. for the codec, I usually go for the zip lossless. Then one important tip, disable overwrite. Think of it like this, you have rendered 10 frames and then you stop the render. If the overwrite is disabled and you start rendering again, it starts from frame 11. But if it is enabled, it will start rendering from the first frame. So it is necessary to uncheck override. So everything seems fine, and now we can go to render and render animation. The hotkey is Ctrl and F12. After your rendering is done, go to the compositing tab and from here, make a new scene. Rename it to comp. Then enable this pin, so that every time that we switch to the compositing tab, Blender will automatically choose this comp scene that we made. And we can go back to the layout, and for the layout we enable the pin for the scene. And as you can see, when we jump between the tabs, it will automatically choose the scene that we pinned. And we can change the scenes from here. So with the comp scene on, enable use nodes and press N to close the side menu. Select the rendered layer node and press X to delete it. Then press Shift A and search for image. Plug it into the composite node. Then from here, navigate to the folder where you have rendered the scene as an OpenEXR sequence. Press A to select all of them, then click on Open Image. Right now we cannot see anything, that's because we need to add a viewer node. So hold down the Shift and the Control key and click on the image node to bring up the viewer node. Then to stay neat, hold down the Shift and the right click and drag across this line to join them together. We can press V to zoom back and Alt V to zoom in. On the image node, you can see we have 201 frames. So in the output panel, I set the end frame of the timeline on 201. And also, if you had a different frame rate, you have to match it here. Mine was 30, so I set it on 30 here. For the output tab, we don't need to change anything. Now if we go to the render panel, again we don't need to change the render engine anymore since we have rendered in cycles. But if we go to the color management, I have rendered with the filmic view transform, but in the new scene it is set on AGX. So we can change it to filmic, but the point is we can leave it for now and change it later once we are in the video editing tab. But since we are supposed to color grade our rendered OpenEXR sequence in the compositing, let's adjust the color management and set it on filmic. Now if we take a look at our image, you can see that we have a lot of noise. So press Shift A and search for denoise. Place it after the image node. And there it goes, the noise is removed. And since we have bright elements, we can use a glare node. Switch it to fog glow and set the quality on high. And for the size, let's go for 7. I guess 8 is a lot. And if you want to kill the glare and decrease that, you can increase the threshold. And it will decrease the area that is affected by the glare. So with the glare node selected, if I press M to mute that, here is the before and here is the after. It makes a lot of changes. Then to color grade, we can add a color balance. And at this point, it is totally optional and it depends on your scene. For example, in my scene, I want to have a kind of bluish color. So I can set the lift on a blue tint color, and these values are really sensitive, so you have to hold down the Shift key to be more precise. As you can see, it makes a lot of changes. For example, if I set it on red, you can absolutely see the difference. Then for the gain, I go for a purple color, a slightly purple color. And for the gamma, maybe a yellowish color. Again, I say it totally depends on your scene to get the look that you like. Of course, in this scene, I have set up everything nicely and it doesn't need a color grade. But again, I say, if you want to color grade your scene, you can use this node. You can see how much difference it can make, and it is pretty powerful. Then add another color balance after the first one. Switch it to offset power and slope. Hold down the Shift key and slightly increase the value of the power property, so that it adds a nice contrast. If you go too far, I guess this won't be the look that you like, but a slight increase will add a nice contrast. Then we can add a hue and saturation node. And here we have a saturation property, which is pretty handy. If I decrease that, it decreases saturation of the colors in the scene. And of course, we can also increase that. But in my case, I guess if I decrease that a little bit, it will give a better result. And if you want the colors of your scene to be brighter, you can use this value. So if you increase that, the colors in your scene will be brighter. And of course, if you decrease that, the vice versa will happen. Then here comes a really important thing. If you want to tweak the RGB channel separately, you can add a separate color node. After that, add a combined color. The red is already plugged in. Plug the green into the green and blue into the blue. Then add a mask node and switch it to multiply. Switch the bottom value to 1, which makes no difference, and set it on the red channel. Now I can control the red color separately. So if I set it on 2, I will have more red color in the scene. But if I set it on 0.5, I will have less red color in the scene. So I want to have less red color, but not that much. So I set it on 0.9 and it will slightly decrease the red color. Then I can press Shift D to duplicate the mask node and set it on the green channel to decrease the green color. Then again I duplicate that once more and set it on the blue channel. And maybe I can set it on 1 to maybe 0.95. This looks better. For the red, let's go for 0.85. But again, I'm not going to get a huge difference, but absolutely these nodes can make huge difference. Now let's add a vignette. Add a mix color and use the bottom image property for the combined color. Then set the first image color on pure black. Add an ellipse mask. If you want to scale it, you can also add an scale node, but I usually don't use this scale node. Then add a blur node. Plug them together like so. Then plug the blur node into the factor on the mix color. On the ellipse mask, set the width on 1 and height on 0.562. On the blur node, enable the gamma property and set the X and Y on 360. There it goes. If you think it is too much, you can set the X and Y on a higher value like 500 or 700. Here is the before and here is the after. It adds a nice vignette. And as a last adjustment, you can add a color correction, which has so many different properties. For the saturation, contrast, gamma, gain and lift, for the different color tolerance, master, highlights, midtones and shadows, which is pretty nice. For example, if you think you have a lot of saturation in the master or highlights, you can decrease that. And it will also decrease the saturation of the bright areas. Again, I say maybe I should decrease that, yeah. And you can of course play around with all of them. Now if I select all the nodes that I added and press M to mute them, here is the before and here is the after. Again, I say this rendered OpenEXR sequence didn't need a color adjustment. But for most of the scenes, this color balanced node will make huge differences. So we are done with the compositing and now we can go to the video editing panel. If you don't have it here, click on the plus icon, video editing panel. Make a new scene, rename it to preview. Don't forget to pin it. Then open add and in the scene, choose the comp scene. Go to the render panel and here we can choose our final look in the color management. As you can see, it is again set on AGX and I should set it on Filmic. Then in the output panel, again make sure the frame rate is matched. So I set it on 30 and adjust the end frame of the timeline. Mine was 201 frames. Then in the output, choose a location for the final video format render. I choose the desktop and I give it a name. In the file format, choose FFmpeg video. Open encoding and for the container, choose MPEG-4. Video codec H.264 is fine. Output property perceptually lossless. And finally audio codec, on AAC. Of course, we don't have any audio, but just in case you use audio, AAC is the best codec. Now if we play, we don't have a real time. That's because we need to enable the catch. So in the side menu, if you don't have it open, press N to open it. In the catch, for the catch setting, make sure the final is enabled and also enable display. And again, in the display tab, make sure the final is checked. And by doing that, you can see the purple bar which shows the catch. And if you play, it starts to load up the catch slowly, and after a few minutes, depending on your PC, you can see the final render in real time. It is not necessary, but if you need to take a look at your final result, just in case you need to make further adjustments, you can use this method, which is pretty handy. And the final step is to press Ctrl and F12 to render this OpenEXR sequence as a video file. And don't worry, it won't take long, since you have done the main render before. So see you next time.